Hello, welcome to Culture Road. Hey, Phil, how are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good, George. And yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. It's been kind of a few weeks of hectic life, but we're getting back to normal. The summer is coming almost to an end in about 2 weeks. And it's that time of the year when you're preparing to have it a go in terms of school. I know that you guys continue working even when the school is closed. But for us, we don't work in the summer, so school is coming. So I know that I'm going to be a little bit more busy. The last couple of days has been very interesting, given what's going on internationally. Whether you're talking about what is going on in Afghanistan, Haiti, and all of that. Now, all of those things are important because they feed into what happens in the political situation here and how we try to fight climate change, given that this is the first time you're having a president who is very much dedicated to climate change. So anything that has an impact on his agenda is really important for us to look at. Angela is not out today, so we shall have a lot of time for ourselves. I just wanted to see what your views are regarding, I think this is the first crisis, or you could say the first big test that Biden has had. I have some views about it. I just wanted to see how you've been, looking around and checking the hue and cry among, foes and friends alike. How do you see this thing panning out? And how did you think about it? What did you think about it? How do you see it panning out? What do you think is likely to be of big damage to the Biden agenda?
Well, as you say, people in both parties are making making a big stink about this. I think the Republicans don't have a leg to stand on, but that never stops them. We have Senator Rick Scott. I love that name. It sounds like a bad radio DJ, And Rick Scott, by the way, has a wonderfully colorful history. Before he entered politics, he was the head of a very large health insurance company, which collapsed amid what was considered the biggest fraud in the history of health insurance. And wouldn't you know it, he happened to resign just before the news broke, and his company, his former company, was accused and then penalized. So technically, he walked away from it without any criminal prosecution. But I mean, the man is a crook and a con artist of the highest order. But because he now leads the GOP's campaign arm, that is, he's in charge of raising money to get the Republicans back in control of the Senate next year. So he doesn't miss any opportunity to jump on Joe Biden. And so here we have him coming out today and saying, I think we should seriously consider the 25th Amendment to remove Biden from office. He's not fit to govern, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. All this noise and BS aside, this was a setback. I mean, clearly, the administration was caught unprepared for the rapidity of the Taliban's takeover of the country. On the other hand, the argument has been made that part of the problem was that the previous administration signed this agreement with the Taliban saying, that we will be out by a set date. And Biden was able to extend the date by a couple of months, but the fact is the Taliban knew they were going to take over. They were prepared for it. So it's not surprising that now that the official deadline had come, they were able to just swoop down. It amazes me that government and military leaders did not think that something like this was going to happen, but there you are. Will he survive the crisis? I think so. I think so. I mean, the fact is that we were planning to leave for reasons that people on both sides really understood. I mean, really, another reason why it's ironic for the Republicans to be criticizing Biden now is because, look, Trump, one reason that he got elected, a strong part of his appeal was what he said was, we're going to end the forever wars. people were sick of having troops committed overseas in what seemed like just a never-ending, really a quagmire. And he said, enough of this, we're going to bring the troops home. And he committed to doing that. As usual, he did it in a fairly sloppy and disorganized way, and we're seeing the results of that. But the fact is that people on the right were just as adamant as people on the left about saying, we've got to get out of this thing. Now, I think we can talk further about, what the implications are for American foreign policy moving forward. But honestly, this was a disaster for which both parties are responsible. The Bush administration for getting us in there in the first place and then changing the rationale for being there. The Obama administration for not trying to figure out a way to get out, especially after bin Laden had been killed, which, was the original purpose of invading Afghanistan in the first place. And then the Trump administration for agreeing to get out, but doing it in this, offhanded, disorganized way. And yes, the Biden administration for not anticipating the swiftness of the Taliban takeover. So there's a lot of blame to go around. We have to focus on getting our allies, the Afghans who helped us, getting them out, getting all of them out. And after that, just taking a good long look at American policy and its failures in foreign and military policy, which really, in my view, go back to the Cold War. We haven't had any unqualified success in military affairs, really, unless you count the invasion of Kuwait, and getting the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Other than that, we have not had any kind of unqualified success in this area in what is now almost 80 years. And this is something that has to be really re-examined. So.
That's interesting. I think I agree with you. It was very interesting also for me to read the New York Times. There is a columnist who came from the Wall Street Journal. I forget his name. His name is
Stevens.
Yes. So he wrote something that caught the attention of a lot of people. And the crux of it is basically that we were in a stalemate. We were not spending much money. There was nobody dying. So we could have basically continued with that kind of existence for time immemorial, which is a lot of BS to me, because he forgot about the fact that being there meant spending a lot of money to sustain that commitment. And the US already had spent a lot of money. I think from some quarters, was it $1 trillion just to maintain its military commitment in the Middle East, and particularly in Afghanistan. It also basically neglected a couple of things. Number one, had Trump been the one who was responsible for withdrawing, of course he was responsible for setting up the timetable and having that conference with the Taliban, but he wasn't good in management. So this chaotic withdrawal was basically written on stone. There wasn't going to be any good solution. And I think Biden alluded to this when in the last couple of days. It is true, though, from my perspective, that the messaging wasn't great. The messaging, the fact that he said, initially he said that the Taliban, I don't trust the Taliban, but I trust the Afghan government, which I don't think was true or was good, because there's no way you could, the Afghan government, given that they had been linked to corruption, they had been, right from the previous government of Hamid Karzai, they were doing nothing. These guys have, usually they use the money that the US is giving them to buy apartments and homes in London and many foreign capitals, which is where they're going right after the Taliban take control. He's out. And one of the things that I'm really, really concerned about is the fact that the locals are so good at deserting their own army. They're always not fighting for their own country. It is important to make sure that if you commit yourself to a country, that you are ready to fight for it. You're ready to go to the bush. You're ready to take the arms. You're ready to do a good thing. What has been going on is the use of the progress made by women in Afghanistan, and that the coming of the Taliban government is going to mean that women will lose, which is true. But if that is the case, and we agree this is true, you have to do something to restore good government to your country. At least you have to be able to defend your country. And the idea of waiting for US soldiers to defend their country, I think is just something that is unconscionable. But at the same time, I agree with you in terms of the history that of foreign wars, the fact that since the Cold War, and in fact, you could say before the Cold War, I think the most successful foreign policy venture, an adventure that stopped Hitler, was the most successful Second World War. Since then, most of these projects have been failed projects, with one or two here that are successful. And that to me points to a big issue regarding what is emanating our foreign policy. What is behind the foreign policy? Is it really meant to sort out problems in a way that is sustainable in those countries? So the question that I'm going to ask you is, what is sustainable in a particular country when you venture to that country, when you go to, say, overthrow a government, and you start from Mossadegh in Iran in 1953?
I mean, George, first of all, let me just say as a little sidebar that, no, Bret Stephens has no credibility on this issue. He is basically a Jewish conservative, fanatically pro-Israel, who is one of those people who feels that, if the U.S. pulls out there, that means that, they might pull out elsewhere, that someday we're going to stop giving money and military aid to Israel, which I don't see happening anytime soon. So I wouldn't regard what he says, with any seriousness. Now, in terms of your question, I mean, this is, okay, the problem with our withdrawal is that there's no way to kind of defend it we can defend it on the grounds of, okay, we were there 20 years and nothing happened. And we weren't making any progress and we're just spinning our wheels and all that. At the same time, we can't ignore the fact that many Afghans are going to suffer. It's quite possible, particularly women and girls. There was a piece in the New York Times yesterday from Malala Yousafzai, a very courageous young woman, the Nobel Prize winner, who, the Taliban attempted to assassinate her, I think in 2012, and she made a name for herself as a crusader for women's rights and women's education in Afghanistan. And she said, I fear for my Afghan sisters what's going to happen now under the Taliban. If once again, women are going to be banned from getting an education, from getting jobs, and, be at the mercy of their fathers and male clan leaders and this male-dominated government and so forth. And this is a very real possibility, which means that, it's very hard to defend our withdrawal without sounding callous and cynical. But at the end of the day, as you say, it's very true. We didn't have enough help from the people we were supposedly fighting with and fighting for. I don't mean the average Afghan. I mean the Afghan military and the Afghan government, which was corrupt, which was factionalized, and in many parts of the country had no real power. The power went to local clans and warlords, And so the bottom line always becomes, as it was in Vietnam, that when we enter these countries, intervening in what are essentially internecine struggles, civil wars, we are really in a no-win situation, because it's not like, we are defending an ally against a foreign invader. We're going into a country and basically trying to take sides in what is a civil war. And you can't win, because we are then seen as the invaders. we are fighting an enemy that often doesn't wear uniforms, that blends in among the civilian population. I mean, I go back again to, this is exactly, I'm old enough to remember Vietnam. I'm old enough to remember the withdrawal from Vietnam and the final days where you saw the exact same chaos that's now happening at the Kabul airport, that was happening at the Saigon airport in 1975. I'm not the first person to say this. There have been parallel photos out all over the news, and other, observers who were there at the time saying how reminiscent this is of what happened in 1975. In both cases, we got involved essentially in a civil war. It may have been with the highest of motives, but at the end of the day, we were the foreigners there. We were fighting an enemy. We were fighting an opponent who could blend in among the civilian population. And among the population, people in power who were supposed to be our allies often, were working against us in the sense that they were so corrupt, sometimes brutal, that they were not going to win the hearts and minds of the population. And the other side, as brutal as they might be, were better able to do that if for no other reason that they seem to be clean and they seem to be not taking bribes. And as you say, putting their money in European banks and all that, and they seem like an alternative. And again, in both cases, I mean, in the case of Vietnam, though, when we pulled out, we left a pretty bad situation. I refer to another column in the Times by the novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen, who evacuated Saigon with his family when he was 4 years old. And he talks about how, hey, we in America act like the war ended in 1975. But the fact is, for Vietnamese who stayed there, who would oppose the North Vietnamese government, for some of them, it was a living hell. They went into re-education camps. Some of them continued to flee the country and died in the process, and so forth. And, we look at this, and we're looking at this in the sense of maybe history repeating itself again. And I think that, Nguyen goes on to say, what we need to do in this country is at least make sure as many Afghan refugees as possible can be evacuated and resettled. That's a start. After that, as I say, I think I wish, I don't think it's going to happen, but I wish this leads to the kind of, reimagining a foreign policy that we should have had 45 years ago to say, look, okay, we have to send the military when we are attacked or when there's a clear danger of our being attacked or an ally has been attacked by a foreign power. Stop getting involved in these civil wars, in these domestic disputes between different groups, neither of which are on the side of the angels usually, because it always ends in disaster. I don't know if we're going to learn that lesson. I hope so. I hope so.
Well, you're right. In the case of Vietnam, of Afghanistan, we had three presidents who had promised to go there, or rather, the one president went. The next one said had promised to end that war, and he didn't. There are reports that the Obama administration actually were lying. They were lying that they were about to end the war, when in fact they were ramping up because they were trying to give time to the Afghan government to prepare and to the Afghan forces to get stronger. But also the fact that he was, like every other American president, on a straitjacket because what is going on is that you have a huge lobby, defense contractors, a huge lobby by foreign governments, particularly the Middle East, who are very, very good at ensuring that the United States remain in the Middle East because they get occupied there, you get all the money flowing in there, your interests are on the top of the White House. So you have that going on. But at the same time, you had a situation whereby I do believe that Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan was used as a pretext to go into Iraq, because as soon as they were successful in driving the Taliban from power, what did they do? They could have left, but they decided. There was an article actually yesterday about that. They could have left because that was a good point to leave, as Bush 1 had done with Iraq in 1989, 1990?
91, yeah, Kuwait, yeah.
They could have left, But if they left, then there would be no justification to go into Iraq. So the war in Iraq just gave the U.S. basically a cover for what they were going to do in Iraq. And of course, the Iraq was a disaster. But the Afghanistan situation became very intractable and became difficult to end. And so basically everybody was paying. You're talking about this lesson from Vietnam. This is the lesson they learned from Vietnam, that you don't end a war, because if you end a war, you're considered a loser. It's easy to start a war. It's just very difficult to end it, because most wars don't end with people or with victors or losers. Most wars end up in stalemates. And this was indeed a stalemate. That is very, very complicated. So it was interesting to hear from Biden that, well, it was going to end up in chaos either way. And so I decided that I was going to be the one to end it. You may not like it, but this is what it's going to come out to. And I think there is a view in the White House that the next election is going to be decided not by issues like Afghanistan, because I think a lot of people have moved away from this, but by what happens domestically, particularly with this virus now making a comeback. So this is what is going to be more important, rather than, there was a messy end to the adventure in Afghanistan. It is true, however, what you touched on regarding forever wars regarding foreign policy issues, and how do you approach it in such a humble way that so that you know how much you can do and how much you cannot do, so that you get measured. You go in a measured way, because actually that is important. I was thinking that there was a lot of hubris, and hubris is very much an American thing, especially when you compare yourself to foreign places. There's always an exaggeration of your ability. There's always poorly defined geopolitical threats. There is always somebody wanting to benefit from it. And in this case, I think the defense industry has played a huge role with the military in making sure that no president has a wiggle room to decide what to do with these wars, particularly in Afghanistan, because the idea that this is going to be a loss was always raised every time somebody wanted to bring the troops home. So I don't think they had a good time to sit down, think about how to end this thing in a way that would everybody would agree to. So that's something that that is there. I agree with you. We got to be more humble, use local expertise, and just respect the people the way they are. They've lived. You cannot change a culture that has grown up for generations, just not even generations, for centuries, in a clan-based system, a tribal-based system, that you want to neglect all that has gone through. And the British did that. They did throughout the world, and it didn't end up well. No, there's a time when the sun was not supposed to set on the British Empire.
Right.
Well,
right.
Right now, I don't know. We have Little England.
Yeah. Right, exactly. The sun set there a long time ago. And, there are those who would say that we now in the United States have an empire as well, in the sense that even though we don't have formal colonies, we have military bases around the world, and we have a network of alliances. And many of these allies outside of Europe really feel that, they've got to do whatever we tell them to do, or not do what we don't want them to do. And I suppose in that sense, it may not be as crude and brutal as the British or the Roman or other empires, but in that sense, it is. And the question has been raised, mostly on the left of, is this really a good thing? I remember years ago, the novelist Gore Vidal was one of the first to raise this, to use the term empire and to kind of, raise this question as to whether we become so overextended in that way that it has nothing to do with any principles of spreading democracy. It's all about power, and that's not a good thing. And it's also true what you say. You can't discount the influence of the military-industrial complex in pushing, our leaders into using weaponry and troops wherever possible. You also can't discount the influence, unfortunately, of, it's amazing. It shouldn't be amazing anymore, but the hypocrisy of these people and how they will turn on a dime about this, but how the conservative establishment, whether pro or anti-Trump, gets together on something like this. This is a defeat. America's honor is at stake. You can't leave. They're always the ones who help prolong these things whenever there's a Democratic president in office. I mean, a similar thing happened with Vietnam and, President Johnson. He knew that if there was any kind of withdrawal that, the Republicans, the right wingers were going to jump all over him about that. And sure enough, once Nixon was elected, he too felt that he couldn't, he was afraid about the reaction from conservatives in his own party. And he shared some of those sentiments. He kept talking about how, American honor was at stake, and he's not going to be, I think both Nixon and Johnson said something to the effect of, I'm not going to be the first president to lose a war, and so on and so forth. So this political angle of it, and I say it's kind of ironic now, because for 4 years we had a president who was all for really a new isolationism and getting out of any kind of foreign commitment that didn't directly benefit us. But hey, now that he's not there anymore, his party feels free to turn around, do a 360-degree turn, and now say, this is dishonor on America and so forth. But anyway, getting back to your point, I think that, what I was saying before, I do think, as you say, we need to have a more humble foreign policy. I think the problem with thinking about foreign and military policy in this country is that people think of it in black and white terms. Either it's isolationism or it's an empire. Either it's, we're the bully of the world, we're the policeman of the world, or it's like, oh, we're shirking our responsibilities and we're leaving the rest of the world to sink into chaos or into dictatorships, yada, yada, and terrorism. Okay, there is a middle ground, I think. In my view, a humble foreign policy simply means that, okay, we use our influence in every way short of military intervention. Okay, we talk to our allies, we speak up, we vote at the United Nations, we use economic weapons, sanctions, what have you. I mean, we use our influence wherever possible. We use our power wherever possible, but we don't send troops and we don't bomb with drones, and we don't do things that really in the long run just make our reputation even worse in the world, no matter what we think of ourselves at home. It's just so counterproductive. And I would like to see some of that going forward. In other words, a middle ground between isolation and the kind of overextension that we've seen again and again and again. But I
agree. I was thinking we still have to find a way to help women in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. This could be something that is not just beyond Afghanistan, because in countries, in societies where women have legitimate power, or at least a sliver of power, there seems to be less and less of conflict. Mm. And somebody has to design a way to convince some of these societies to give up, for men in these societies to give up their power to women, at least some power to women, because the complementary work of women and men makes a balanced society in which there is more focus on progress than on issues that are not helping. And there is this part of the Middle East, and particularly Afghanistan, of course, I think Pakistan has a little bit of this, where we have women are not given due consideration, even within families, within the tribes, within clans. within regions. And what you end up having is a situation whereby there is always constant conflict. But you cannot do this by imposing your values or your ideas on them. I think there's got to be something about using the power of diplomacy, using some carrots to get people to move away from situations that are very destructive. In a majority of the countries, actually, across Africa, across Latin America, this is no longer the idea that women's rights are people's rights. I think that's very well accepted. Now, the problem, of course, is that you have the use of Islam by some in these societies to subjugate women. And this is just an interpretation of the Quran that a lot of people also disagree with. So the UAE, I think Saudi Arabia has been trying in the last year or so, but they were doing that because they're battling against the wall after the murder of Khashoggi, to give a lot more rights to women. So this is something that going forward, I would like to see the administration focus on and promoting women's rights, the rights of children, working against labor, the laws, anti-labor laws, labor laws that promote children and not allow children to be used against their wishes. And this has been one of the, I used to cover the United Nations Children's Fund, and this is some of the things that they deal with. And it's a big issue in some of these places where women's rights are not respected, children's rights are not respected. But this is not something, as I said earlier, that we can impose. In fact, foreigners sometimes end up aggravating the situation. If you remember what happened in Haiti after 2010 earthquake, the first few months, yes, there was a lot of support, but then what we ended up is in a situation whereby even the aid workers were sexually molesting local women, and that's not very, very good. So we should be going as, at least the US should be going, or the Western nations should be going as people who are trying to support and help, and refrain from doing things that are counterproductive. It was so disingenuous for Condoleezza Rice to write an article in the Washington Post yesterday saying, criticizing Biden, when in fact they lied in 2001 on this critical issue of Afghanistan. Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me the way they can be so blatant in their
hypocrisy, really.
Hypocrisy, exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, every time I see a piece from someone like Rice or David Frum or all these other people who beat the drums for invading Iraq, I just have to gag. It's like, really, some people have no shame. And it's an unfortunate thing. I mean, I guess you could say it's the downside of having free speech in this country is that, someone who, and also I think this kind of free pass or kowtowing that we give to anyone who served in government and wasn't convicted of committing a crime, that gives them some sort of, credibility right there that, okay, I know there were disagreements about policy, but this person is still, has the experience and the blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry. These people, were responsible for a disaster. They have no credibility. They shouldn't be, their opinions should not be printed. But of course, we have no control over that. Back to what you were saying, George, about Haiti. Yeah, I think that again brings up the question of really the nature of of our role in the world and how do we intervene? I mean, I think this is what really makes it a conundrum in many of these countries. And I would put Afghanistan as an example as well, because of the women's rights issue in particular. We know that it's a good thing, that having more equity, more gender equity is a good thing, not just morally right, but it's more productive for a society. We've seen that over and over again. I think you make a good point that in Latin America, which, traditionally was one of the most patriarchal societies in the world, you now have, plenty of women in the professions, in the government. You've had in, more than one South American country, you've had female presidents. They've made an incredible amount of progress in just maybe 1 or 2 generations. You can say the same thing in many Asian countries. So it's really, we're not talking about, let's face it, we're talking about Muslim countries where this kind of thing is still the most intense and the most serious. That's not to say that there aren't problems of sexism and misogyny in other countries, including this one, but that's where it's most blatant and most intense. So the question is, how do you change that? You obviously can't change it at the point of a gun. Okay, so you have to change that through some sort of combination of, as you say, economic carrots and sticks and education and, trying to penetrate the countries with the internet and so forth, and just show people, and not just in the cities. The issue, it usually doesn't happen in the cities. It's in the rural villages. It's always in the most conservative, isolated areas of any country where these ideas are the most persistent. And you have to somehow reach into those regions and convince the people that there's a different way of doing things. And it's not easy. And, it may seem a lot quicker and cleaner to just have an invasion and declare that, women are equal in a country. But as we've seen, it's not quick and clean and it doesn't work. And in Haiti, it's not simply, it's a matter of so many different issues of poverty, of really racism between the lighter skinned elite and the darker skinned masses, the terrible economic inequities, the official corruption, political murders, you name it. Okay. It is a basket case, and I say that with all respect. I don't blame the Haitian people for this because
Right.
It's been pointed out many times. All right,
Yeah.
They were the first Black-controlled republic in the Western Hemisphere, which caused people like, Thomas Jefferson at the time to have agita. And really, for the first 100 years or so, they were kind of treated as pariahs by white North American governments. Then finally, in 1915, we actually invaded Haiti and occupied the island for 18 years. And later on, we supported, brutal dictators like Papa Doc Duvalier and his son, who brutalized the country for decades. Our hands are not clean here. And the fact that in 2010, as you say, we went in a more benign way with better intentions, that still, it still went badly because we still, I think, went in with the idea that we know what's best for the Haitians, or that, these people are in such a mess, we have to come here and straighten things out. No. There has to be a certain degree of humility that you can look at the situation and say, okay, it looks chaotic, but let's look below the surface and see what the specific issues are in the country and see the way that we can, for want of a better word, that we can do good without making things worse. And that's something that we continually seem to lose sight of.
That's true, because I was reading a couple articles recently, and one of the things it said was that, when we went to Haiti, we went with a lot of money. There was a lot of money that was collected by the Clinton Foundation, by Red Cross. The government gave, the U.S. government gave some good money. Western governments gave a lot of money. What it ended up doing was that most people went to do the work. The Haitians were, for the most part, sidelined. And I'm talking about Asian professionals who could have been absorbed into the civil society that was emerging. And then what happened is that those who could afford it had to leave. And so you have a country that was left without doctors. I was reading yesterday that there's only one surgeon, in Port-au-Prince, one surgeon, and in the middle of an earthquake that has killed over 1,000 people. What is one surgeon going to do? And so a lot of Haitians went away. And I would actually have to say that Haitians have to also do something about that in terms of finding a pipeline back home in situations where you have a disaster like this. But I believe that maybe they're doing that. I haven't read. I'm not educated enough on what they're doing, but I would imagine that they're doing a lot. Still, we need a better way of disaster management, particularly those that are outside of this country. Now, coming back to this country, we are actually awaiting a couple of named storms that are coming, and they're coming to southern Florida at a time when that state is really, really finding itself in the middle of a COVID outbreak, and it is really interesting to see what will happen with the governor that is, for all intents and purposes, is right now campaigning to be president. Because that's perhaps what he's doing with some idiotic policies that is coming up with stopping school boards from instituting these policies about that will save people fast, that will save a lot of students. There was another story in Mississippi that within 1 week, almost 400,000 students are on quarantine because of COVID. And part of the reason is they don't want to use masks. It's unconscionable. This is not how to run a country in the middle of disaster.
Well, I don't know what we can add to what we've already said before. DeSantis, Abbott in Texas, the governor of Mississippi, whose name escapes me, they all have, a few things in common. I mean, maybe, Abbott and the Mississippi governor aren't angling to be president or vice president on a Trump 2024 ticket, but they have the same idea in mind, which is that, masking is a liberal idea. Okay, COVID preparation is a liberal idea. It's a big government idea. Therefore, our political identity depends on our opposing this kind of thing. You can't tell us to do anything. I mean, sometimes I think that a lot of conservative philosophy comes down to really an 8-year-old sticking his fingers in his ears and saying, you can't make me. I mean, I don't mean to, I'm not saying there isn't a strong conservative intellectual tradition, but some of these politicians, this is honestly what it comes down to. You can't tell me not to buy an AK-47. You can't tell me to wear a mask. You can't tell me to get vaccinated. Folks, freedom is not unlimited, okay? We can tell you not to drive 180 miles on the highway. Why? Because you might kill someone, okay? We're telling you with these other things that I mentioned because other people could be affected. And this is a concept that just seems foreign to them, that what people do, especially in a well-populated, a heavily populated country like ours, is that, these things don't happen in a vacuum. What you do affects other people. And yes, that's as true in small towns and rural areas as it is in big cities, but they don't seem to get that. And I mean, it's sad. And what can you do? You can only hope that maybe, again, we can't send in federal troops to Texas and say, okay, you have to let the school districts have their mask mandates. No, maybe you can just say, listen, encourage the people within those states to look at the statistics, to think about, do you have a friend who lost her father, whose father is in the ICU with COVID because he didn't get vaccinated, okay? Build up these stories and try to build a counter narrative that says there is a reason for doing this and is a reason for public health and safety. That's all it is. I don't feel any schadenfreude about the people in these states getting sick and dying. I don't want that to happen. But I do hope that it has some consequences for the leaders of these states and these stupid, destructive policies they're pursuing. But I guess we'll have to see.
It all comes down, Phil, to what is somebody getting out of any situation, whether it's foreign or domestic. Somebody is always benefiting. Who is that? What are they benefiting? Often it's money or power or both.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, my friend. That has been one of the best discussions we've had, the two of us. And please tune in to our next episode. And that's good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.